You know that feeling when you're playing Mario Kart so you know that feeling when you know that feeling when you play Mario Kart and you can't even get through the first line of your script? You know that feeling when you play Mario Kart and you're way out ahead in front of everybody else? First place, baby, and then you get hit by some obnoxious, stupid item and you come second? Like, it's so frustrating. There's literally an item in the game that punishes you for being first. It punishes you for being too good at the game. And when I'm in front, all I get from the boxes is bananas and coins and stuff, but the people in the back get bullet bills and blue shells. Why would Nintendo design their game this way? Well, simply put, it's a comeback mechanic. Mario Kart is supposed to be a fun party game, and getting completely dumpstered with absolutely no chance of catching up to first place isn't very fun. So the game tries to make every single race closer than they would have been otherwise by giving the strong players bad items and the weak players good items. This not only means that the weaker players have a chance to have some fun, but it also means that every single race is much more dramatic because anyone could take first at any given time. The race is much closer, so they're much more exciting. This is known to most people as a comeback mechanic, but if you wanted to be a little more formal about it, you would call it a negative feedback loop. A feedback loop, simply put, is when a player's wins or losses impact future wins or losses. For example, a negative feedback loop is when a player's failures make them more likely to win in the future, and a player's successes make them less likely to win in the future. And Mario Kart is the perfect example of this. The players out in first, second and third get worse items than the players further back than them, meaning that getting ahead now makes you less powerful later and vice versa. Negative feedback loops like this are not actually that common in video games, because they can feel very unintuitive. The player that's losing being rewarded for being bad doesn't make that much sense to most people, and it feels cheap when the guy in 11th comes first place in the race because he got a really good item that one time. So a lot of multiplayer games will try and avoid massive negative feedback loops like this in the way that Mario Kart has them. They are still present in a lot of games, just in much smaller ways. For example, in Team Fortress 2, the team that controls the control point in King of the Hill has longer respawn times than the team that doesn't control the control point, allowing the other team to get a chance to capture the point. But that's about as major as they get for most games. Negative feedback loops end up being much more common in party games though. Mario Kart's system works like this because it makes for a much more fun, casual experience. But competitive games usually don't try and reward the players who are behind too much, because it can sometimes feel like the winning player or team is being cheated out of their victory. But negative feedback loops aren't completely absent from competitive games though. In fact, lots of major sports like basketball or football feature negative feedback loops. When one team scores a point, the other team starts with the ball in the next session of play, giving the team that just lost a point an advantage. This of course also bleeds over into sports games like FIFA and NBA 2K and stuff like that. Most racing games, including Mario Kart, have what's called rubber banding. Players that are quite far behind will drive faster than people out in front. The game tries to help further behind players catch up to their opponents to try and make the games closer. This is probably the most common form of negative feedback loop in any competitive game, although not every racing game has this. So if we've talked about negative feedback loops a whole bunch, surely there must be positive feedback loops too, right? Well yeah, there is, and positive feedback loops are far more common and far easier to find examples for, because they're literally everywhere. Call of Duty killstreak rewards help strong players win even harder. Killing enemy players in MOBAs gives you money, and that money buys you items and upgrades that make it easier for you to kill them in future. In chess, capturing an opponent's pieces gives them fewer tactical options than you, and makes trading your pieces with your opponents advantageous to you. If negative feedback loops are there to help the struggling players keep up, then positive feedback loops are there to make the strong get stronger. Positive feedback loops help to push games to their conclusion. If one team has started winning, the feedback loop will accelerate them to their victory. This is very helpful to avoid stalemates from occurring. If these feedback loops didn't exist, a lot of games could get caught in a stalemate situation, where neither team is able to finish the job. positive feedback loops also end up being complained about a whole lot less, because rewarding the better players is a lot more intuitive than rewarding people for losing. Well, it's mostly more intuitive, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But the downside of these feedback loops is that struggling players aren't really allowed to have very much fun. Anyone who's played League of Legends for any extensive period of time will know that nothing feels worse than losing a game of League of Legends. Hell, even just dying 1v1 in lane is one of the most soul-crushing experiences that someone can have. The strong getting stronger might feel intuitive and fair to most, but it can leave the weaker players behind, and it can intimidate newer or less experienced players into quitting the game entirely. But a poorly implemented positive feedback loop that is spontaneous, poorly understood by players, and doesn't achieve the goal that it was intended to achieve, can really ruin the fun in what otherwise is a really good game. I'm of course It's random crits. It's random crits in Team Fortress 2. Now, I can already imagine some TF2 players being like, what? Random crits aren't a feedback loop. It's just a % chance to deal 3 times the damage for no reason. How is it a feedback loop? Oh, you sweet, sweet, innocent child. I regret to inform you that your chances of getting a random crit actually increase depending on how well you're doing. That's right, your critical hit percentage increases based on how much damage you have dealt in the last 20 seconds. The base critical strike chance in TF2 for most weapons is 2%, but you can increase that to a whopping 12% if you have dealt 800 or more damage in the last 20 seconds. So some of you might be wondering, why is this a problem when the other positive feedback loops I mentioned do basically the same thing? Why is rewarding good players with crits bad, but rewarding good players with crazy kill streaks isn't? Well, it's because of 2 very important factors that go into making a good positive feedback loop. It needs to be understandable, and it needs to be preventable. If you're playing Call of Duty and you see a helicopter floating about in the sky shooting people, you understand that one player got 7 kills in a row without dying, and they're now being rewarded with this helicopter to help them get even more kills. Not only that, but the player on the receiving end of the helicopter fire can actually do something about it. They can hide from the helicopter, or even shoot it down if they're feeling really ambitious. Random crits do not abide by either of these rules. Tell me, is there anything that this poor sod could have done to prevent what's about to happen to him? No. The answer is no. He has no way to see it coming, and even if he magically knew that your next attack would be a crit, there still isn't anything he can do to stop it from instantly killing him. The other key problem is that most people don't actually understand that this is the way that crits work. The fact that crit chance scales based on damage dealt is quite obscure knowledge, especially to new players. The game doesn't actually tell you this at all. It just appears to be a random chance to deal quad damage for no reason. You have to go to the wiki to find this information. Not to mention that the base critical strike chance is 2%, not 0%. So it's a pretty bad positive feedback loop in the first place. If a particularly lucky free-to-play player can just rub his last 2 brain cells together really hard and get a random crit, regardless of how well he's doing, then what's the point in rewarding the skill players with crits anyway? It's like if you could get 7 kills to get a helicopter kill streak, or you could just pull a lever on a slot machine and randomly get a helicopter reward for free for no reason. Random crits don't work as a positive feedback loop, because they're far too spontaneous, far too hard to understand for most players, and they don't actually feel like a reward that was earned. If you listen to Valve's developer commentaries, they talk about random crits, and one of the things they mentioned is that they wanted to break stalemates with crits. But they're not actually very good at doing that, since the worst team with worse players can still roll their 2% chance to kill you anyway, and the skilled players can potentially have awesome 1v1 fights completely ruined by random garbage for no reason. If I worked at Valve, I would disable random crits in casual servers, and accept that the random crit mechanic was a failed attempt at a positive feedback loop. But alas, I do not work at Valve. And if I did, I'd probably work on Half-Life.